All right, so welcome to our discussion on texturing part 3. Today we're going to be dealing with something that we refer to in a couple of different terms. One is called cutout opacity. RenderMan calls it presence. This is where we can actually remove, by using an alpha channel, parts of our unwanted geometry. For example, the wine label is basically a cylinder when you unhide it, if it's hidden for you. And then what we're going to do is find a wine label that has a nice shape, put it on the bottle, remove the unwanted portions of the geometry so that it looks like it's glued onto the bottle. We'll just do a quick review on some file mapping methods. I know we went over them in Lecture 8. Today we're going to talk about layering in Maya. We talked about layering in Photoshop on, Lecture 8 on Friday. Tony talked about it in Substance. And today we're going to talk about it in Maya. Some common layering blend modes. That's something we really haven't talked about yet. We just kind of went through some steps for you in Photoshop. Tony went over a couple in Substance. Adding a little bit of wear and tear using projections. Projections, again, are going to be, basically taking a 2D texture and putting it in 3D so we can move it around in X, Y, Z, position it where we want it. If you haven't done so, download the SAL Layer Textured PDF. Office hours tomorrow will be 11 to 1, and then again from 2 to 4. We also have an open lab in Go to Training that Frank is running. That will be from basically 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. So we got a couple of resources to hit us up on. All right, so I guess the first thing we'll start off with is using presence maps for cutout opacity. That way we can tackle the wine bottle. How many people are doing the exterior scene? All right, 1, 2, 3, 4. Everybody else doing interior? Okay. You may or may not have cause to use it in the interior, depending on if you want to put a label on one of the bottles, like the hourglass bottle, although that's kind of a weird shape. The rectangle bottle might work. Or the what? Thermos. The thermos we're actually going to do a projection on, and we're going to be using Maya's layering system for that. I'll show you how to do that with a projection. That doesn't necessarily need to be cutout opacity because that's going to be as though it's painted on there and not like a paper label. And since there is no geometry for the label itself, it makes more sense to be, just glued or painted, not glued, but painted on. All right, so we can change this order based on, what you want it. Nicholas was asking about the cutout opacity for the wine bottle, so we'll do that first. All right, so we went over this a little bit the other day, I think. But opacity or mask maps are just simply black and white maps that we use to define what is transparent and what is not transparent. Anything that is black in your map or your alpha, your mask, whatever you want to call it, is going to be transparent. That means removed. Anything that's white will be opaque. That means it's kept or held. So very simple checker pattern plugged into the Pixar surface all the way down in the global section. Globals is kind of another section we really haven't talked too much about. Globals, and we drop it into presence. It is only expecting black and white information. So that makes it simple. So black equals removed, white equals kept, held, or opaque. So if we're going to do a wine label, first off, what do we need to get?
A label.
A label, yes. Makes sense. Seems silly, but you'd be surprised. So let's find a label. So let's look for wine labels. Oops. So under images, I also like to get my size to be at least 1K. All right, so here are some of the options we have. That's not bad, that's not bad, that's not bad. Not too bad. So somebody pick a label shape or a label itself. Which one? This one? Or this one? Or that one? This one? Okay. Let's see what that looks like. Well, it's got some imperfections in it, so that might be interesting. We can do that one. All right, so one of the things that we need to do, and this helps to make this presence or opacity map or basically an alpha channel that we can use. This makes it much easier when we take it into Photoshop, and what we need to do is basically extend the canvas a little bit all the way around it. So we have a little bit of a border. And our border background is going to be white, black, it doesn't really matter. Just something that we can select, because when we make an alpha or a mask in Photoshop, we can make it very simply off of our selection. And if your selection is the right part of your image, for example, when I get into Photoshop, it'll make a lot more sense. But if it's the right part of your image, we can make a mask. It will automatically give it the right color and put it in the right place in our channel. Because right now, this is going to be an RGB image, and it does not have an alpha. We're going to give it and make it an alpha in Photoshop. All right, so this looks like it'll work okay. So I'm going to right-click, save image, Old World wine label, perfect. All right, so there's our Old World wine label. Open it up in Photoshop. All right, so normally everything in Photoshop will usually bring up your image in channels. If I take a look at it in layers, you'll see it is RGB, but there is no alpha channel. And the alpha channel is where we use to plug in, or we use the alpha channel to plug into the presence channel of the Pixar surface. All right, so like I said, in order to create an alpha channel, I need some kind of border around the image. Right now, there's nothing there. So the easiest way to do that is go to Image, Canvas Size, and you notice that toward the bottom of the Canvas Size window, there is a little anchor point. Now, in Photoshop, that anchor point means that whatever you do here, if you scale it smaller or make it bigger, it by default will do it proportionately in all directions. Now you can reset that anchor point anywhere you want. So for example, if I know I want it to extend down and over and anchor my point to the upper left, all I have to do is click in that little piece right there. And basically I can set my anchor point anywhere in this grid. But the most common position for your anchor point is dead center. Now, we can extend this based on pixels. We can extend it based on inches, picas, centimeters, millimeters, whatever you want. So let's see what it is in pixels. All right, not too bad. So what I'm going to do is just extend it roughly a ½ inch. So I'm going to extend the width to 4 inches and the height to 3.5. So that gave me a white background, totally fine. Because what I can use this white background for is to do a quick selection of all the white pixels. Now, the nice thing about me extending it is all those white pixels are pure. There are no, kind of aliasing or, fuzzy pixels from being compressed. Now, one of the quickest selection tools, if you don't have experience with it in Photoshop, is called the magic wand. Anybody use that? Yeah, so the magic wand is really awesome because you can set a range or a threshold that it will use as a selection point. For example, I will use the magic wand tool, which is the 4th tool from the top. Right here, you want your sample size to be point sample. By default, your tolerance is 32, which means it's 32 pixels in a range from whatever pixel you select. So for example, if I select this white pixel here, it will pick surrounding pixels within a 32 range step from pure white to some level of gray. Does that make sense? So it's a range. Now, as I narrow that, it will narrow it so the range is not as big and it will not select unwanted pixels. So for this is pure white and the border around this is pretty good. So if I change my tolerance to, well, let's see what it looks like at 32. All I have to do is click anywhere in that white background and it will basically select the background itself. Notice it selects the outside, it selects the inside. Let's zoom in and take a look at the edge and see how accurate 32 pixels are. All right, so not too bad. Looks like it was a nice clean selection. Doesn't look like it's dipping into my label at all. Now, if my tolerance were too big, I would see areas where my selection would start to jump into the actual label itself. What you want to try to do is minimize that so you can drop your tolerance down lower and lower until you get just the pixels you want sampled. Like right here, it's starting to jump around a little bit by a couple of pixels. So maybe if now, I'm going to try and reselect this. What is the way to deselect in Photoshop? Anybody know?
Control D. Yeah, Command D.
Command D on a Mac, Control on a PC. All right, so I can deselect. Let me knock that in half and see what I get. I'm going to drop it down to 16 pixels, reselect it. It's still going into or carving around some of the spots on my image. Drop that down to 8, see what we get. Yeah, it's still doing it. Let's deselect. Let's try 4. Still the same. Let's try 1. It's about as low as we can go. Well, still doing it. Yeah. So we'll go back. We'll stick with, actually, nah, we'll go back. We'll stick with 1. There we go. It's about as good as we're going to get. All right. So what I've done here is I've actually selected everything but the label. Right? When I click in the white area, it selects just the white. So if I try to make an alpha channel out of this, this is the result we'll get. So with my selection, I can go into channels, and there is a button at the bottom that is a gray box with a dark circle in it. If I click in that box, it will make an alpha channel for me. Basically, alpha channel, black and white of my selection. Whatever I have selected, it will make white. Whatever I don't have selected, it will make black. Now, based on what I just showed you in that keynote slide about alpha channels and masks, which color is transparent? Black. So, if I drop this in and use this, what will it do?
Make the label transparent.
Right. It will make my nice background visible, but the label itself will be transparent. So what we need to do is we need to invert our selection. That way, when I go to make a mask, it will give me the label as white, the background part as black. So what I can do is, since I know this is a scrap alpha, I'm just going to delete that. Go back to layers. How can I flip my selection in Photoshop?
Select inverse.
Right. So I can go to the select menu, inverse, or the shortcut is Shift Command I. So there we go. Now I have inverted my selection, which means just the label itself is selected. Now when I go into my channels in Photoshop, go down to the bottom and click on my light square with the dark circle, which is actually save selection as channel. Now my alpha channel will look like this. The background itself will be black and the label shape will be white. So if I just isolate that channel, that's what it'll look like. Black background, white. We need this little bit of black background because that's going to define the area that we want removed when we plug it into the presence channel of the surface shader, the Pixar surface. All right, so when you're done with making your alpha channel, first off, you want to make sure you save it as a Targa file for import into Maya. So we're going to go save as. Anytime you convert a regular RGB image and add an alpha, it's good workflow to put the word alpha at the end of it. That way you know exactly what that file contains, especially if you're going to hand this off to somebody else. So I'm going to put an underscore and put alpha. Now, at the bottom, make sure Targa is your format and make sure alpha channels is selected. If you don't do that, the magic is gone. So now I'm going to hit save. It's going to ask me Targa options. Until this point, what was the bit resolution you chose? 24. You need 32 if you have an alpha channel. Because each channel has 8 bits of information. Red, green, blue, alpha. 8 times 4 is 32. We don't want to compress it. We hardly ever compress it with the RLE. So just save it. Now we're set. All right, at this point I'm going to quit out of Photoshop just because Photoshop doesn't play too well with Maya. Now my label's all set to go. So next step, launch Maya. I'm going to open up my exterior scene. I've got a version on there with just the wine bottle done. And I'm going to add my label to it. let me set my project. All right, if you're like me, you probably wound up hiding your label. That way you can work on just getting the wine bottle to look good. So first thing I have to do is unhide my geometry for the label. So that would be in your scene folder or the scene group in the outliner. Down under the Villa Geo group, under wine bottle, and there's a wine bottle group, and then that's where the geometry is. I can tell it's hidden because it is grayed out. I'm going to unhide it, which is Shift H. And now that geometry is back wrapped around my bottle. All right, so at this point, let's go and do that. All right, so the first step in doing the wine label is going to be assign what to the geometry.
Oh, material.
Yeah, we need a new material because by default it's probably going to have the Pixar Surface 1, which is the default that you probably assign to everything. All right, so I'm going to do Shift T, which is the shortcut. Assign a new Pixar surface. It's always a good idea, label your materials so you know what they are. So that's my label. There we go. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is assign this so we can see it on the bottle itself. Where do we assign textures? What part of the material? Where?
Diffuse.
Yes, diffuse color. Remember, that's the main part, the base. That will be color information. That will also be texture or visual detail. So diffuse color, we're just going to assign it as a file. Don't need to assign it as a projection because the UVs are set up for the label already. Right, once you do that, your material will have a file node plugged into the diffuse color. This is where you're going to put your alpha channel, or not the alpha, but the wine label that we just made. Now, one thing you probably should do, which I didn't do, which I'm going to do right now, is take your label and drop it into your project folder. Into what folder? Source images, right. So I'm going to go drop it in there. So now when I go to get image, it should be here. There it is. Now, by default, when you place a texture on, it's going to cover the entire 0 to 1 space. It's going to wrap itself around. So this looks like a really cheap bottle of wine that somebody got somewhere that doesn't quite fit right. And you would expect to find that in the 99-cent shelf in a store somewhere, because it probably is turned to vinegar if it looks like that. All right, so the first thing we want to do is let's scale this. And one of the requirements of the project is we need to be able to see the glass of the bottle on all 4 sides of the label. That tells us that you know how to use this tool. And also, most wine bottles are set up that way, because when they put them on the shelf, they want to be able to see the entire label so people don't have to pull it out and turn it. When you're shopping, you just want to go, I want that one. That's why labels are sized very specifically to face the viewer and to get as much of the label in there so you can read it at a glance. Very few bottles will wrap around, unless you've got a big, giant bottle. So, to rescale this, we're not going to go back into Photoshop. We're not going to pull any kind of place 2D coverage voodoo on it. What we're going to do is simply select the geometry and go into the UV editor. So notice it does cover the entire 0 to 1 space, and our teeny, puny, human-looking UVs just dwarf compared to it. Now, I know in model creation, they tell you never put anything outside the 0 to 1 space. However, if you're not doing a game collage or it's required that everything be in 0 to 1, you can go outside with this. So what I'm going to do simply is right-click and select the UVs and scale it up. How much? Well, I'm going to see if I can see it. It's kind of hard to see it with those dancing pixels here. All right, there we go. It's a little better. Let me go back to object mode. Needs to be just a little smaller. Which means my UVs have to be a little bit bigger. All right, there we go. I can see at a distance, I can see left, right side of my wine bottle, and I can see the top. Now, I have some unwanted things going on here. The first is what?
Repetition.
Yes, I gotta have repeating wine labels. I don't want that. I want a single wine label. Like I said, by default, it is set to wrap itself around and keep repeating to fill up the 0 to 1 space. Now, to fix that, we need to go into our network. Simplest way, select the wine label and go into the hypershade. In the hypershade, you want to graph the material that you made for the wine label. In this case, I called it label. I'm going to right-click and graph network. There's my Pixar surface shading group, my surface material, my label, and the place 2D texture. All right, so the first thing I want to do is turn off wrap U and wrap V. There we go. So part one. It's done. Actually, a couple of parts here. We've got a new material. We've assigned the texture to that material. We scaled the UVs up so that the label fits on the bottle. And then we stopped it from repeating. So if I render this out now, I will get hopefully expected results. It's going to look pretty much like that. Except you're going to be able to see that it's glass. So it'll be a green wine bottle with a label that's got gray background, white, and then the label itself. So I'm going to render right from perspective. Save a little time. All right, let me hit escape. I'm going to go in and tweak some of my render settings so it renders a little faster. I know I can clean it up, so I just want to cut down the time it takes to think about it. Let's knock that down a little. All right, there we go. But I can see what's going on. I can see my label. I can see I've got a white background, and I've got this gray. Now, this is where we use the same file, because remember, this file is an alpha channel. We use the same file, and we plug it into the presence part of the material. So back into Hypershade, because this connection is really simple in the Hypershade. Let me close some of these windows, or at least minimize the it. All right. So here's my label Pixar surface. Presence is way down here towards the bottom. And here is my wine label file node. It's got alpha on it. So the connections we want to make are, this is my wine label file. I want to go out alpha down to presence. If I click on that little green circle next to out alpha, left click, hold, and drag, I can drag a little noodle or connector down to presence, and it will connect itself. Now, you're not going to see anything in your viewport until you render. So let me re-render again. And what it should do now is use the alpha channel I created to remove all the geometry except for the label. Witchcraft. No, it's just efficient use of what's there. Now, that label is okay, but might not be the best for viewing purposes from the camera because, you know, the type was kind of thin on it, the label's kind of pale, all the colors kind of blend in with the background. You may want to find a label that's got a little more pop to it so it's readable, but that will still work. So this is what we had before. Simply by making that alpha connection from my file node, remember that file had an alpha in it, from alpha file to presence Pixar surface. Question? Now, most advanced shaders or materials or renderers have this capability. Mental Ray, they called it a opacity map. Cut out opacity was what it uses. Arnold's got it too. I don't remember what it is in Arnold. I think it's called opacity in there. Pixar likes presence because it's Pixar. Everything's got to begin with a P. Now, as with any material, if your label is a little shiny, you can increase some of the reflectivity, you know, keep the roughness pretty low. You can have roughness low, it's really going to make it a difference. Now, this label is kind of scuffed up a little bit, so you might want to have a little bit of roughness on there, just enough to take some of the shine off, if there is any shine. Normally you would get reference of some kind, but labels are usually fairly smooth. They're not really too rough. All right, questions? Make sense? Okay. All right, so let's take a look. All right, so we can cross off presence maps. What do you guys want to see next? On the thermos. Okay, yeah, we'll do projections. All right, so for that, we will use the interior scene. Anybody doing the interior night? Okay, so a couple people, everybody else is doing day. Okay. Day or night doesn't really matter. You can use, the same workflow, the same material. I was just curious. All right, so the first thing we're going to use is we provided you with a AAA logo. All right, so that AAA logo was in... There we go. It should be in Project 7, down at the bottom. There we go, Thermos logo. All right, so basically it looks like this. What we're going to do is use this projection, or this logo, this decal, if you will. We're going to use that to project it in 3D space onto the thermos. All right, so let me copy this and put that logo into my project folder. Put it into source images. There we go. All right, so interior day. Let's see. I believe I hid the glass. Yeah, I did. I hid a couple of the bottles to save some render time. Like the hourglass. Yeah. So I'm going to hide those. Cut down on render time. So first thing you want to do is make sure you've got a version that has the right material. You've got the anisotropic effect. It looks like brushed metal. All right, let me check my render settings. Yep. Yep. Ooh. No. Too much. There we go. So let me do a quick render from perspective just to get a feel for where that is. All right. All right. Let's turn this down to 32 also. This way I can use just the crop tool to zero in on the thermos, and I don't have to render the whole thing out. All right, first thing off, we want to figure out where does the logo get plugged into. Where do you think it gets plugged into? Color. Where? Color of what? Diffuse. Okay, let's take a look. Now, metal is kind of a strange beast because the metal we have here is mostly, let's take a look at it since this is similar to it. This is mostly what?
Polished metal.
Polished, or mostly reflections we're looking at. Really doesn't have a base color per se. And notice that our color we set up when we made this anisotropic material is black. Black, and that's mostly to shut down any color bleeding in from the diffuse because this is mostly mostly reflectivity. So now we have to figure out, great, where does it go? Well, most of what we see in reality is based off of reflectivity. So what we're going to do is we're going to plug it into the primary specular into the edge color. Now here's why the edge color will work. Edge color is where you plug in spec maps to control reflectivity. Let's take a look at what our logo is. First off, what color is the logo itself? If we plug this in as a spec map or a reflection map, what is black going to do to the reflection?
I'm going to turn it down, like completely.
Yeah, turn them off. What is my background?
White.
White. So, what color is my edge color in the material? White. So this map will work in here because anywhere the logo is not visible will be a white background. And that means my material will reflect just like it normally does. The area where the logo is black, that is basically going to be non-reflective. So if it's non-reflective, that means it's going to pick up what color? Black. Right, because remember, when we shut reflectivity off here, we pick up the leftovers from here. Remember, Pixar surface tries to be what we call physically accurate as far as conservation of energy. That means if you've got a lot of reflectivity, you've got very little diffuse. If you've got more diffuse, you've got less reflectivity. If you've got transparency, it shuts off the diffuse, it shuts off the reflectivity. It tries to maintain 100% energy efficiency. That means you can only have 100% of the energy in any one place at any one time. Make sense? So it's a balancing act. And fortunately, the Pixar surface does a pretty good job. The only one we control manually is this diffuse section, because artistically it gives us a little bit of extra push. So, edge color is where we're going to plug that map into. So I'm going to click the checker button next to it. Now, instead of hitting with the left mouse button, File, for a projection, I need to do what? Anybody remember?
Right click.
Right click and choose projection. So I'm going to narrow my selection to 2D textures. I'm going to right click on the word File and choose Create as Projection. Now, once I do that, if I go into the Hypershade and graph my thermos, here's my thermos plastic, here's my thermos metal, so let me graph that. You'll see that I have a projection file plugged into specular edge color. The thing that drives my projection is the place 3D. That lets me move it around in 3D space. Attached to this are the passengers. That happens to be our file. Our file also, and anytime you've got a 2D file, comes with a 2D placement for UV. Repeating, whatever you need to do with it. Here, this is where we plug in our logo. So in File, going to bring in the AAA logo. It's going to have a white background. Now, this is going to be a little tricky because a lot of times when we're in the viewport, we're used to dealing with visibility on primary base color. Since we're dealing with this logo in the primary specular, we're not going to see it till we render it. That's one of the downsides of working with rendering. All right, so we made a projection. That projection is driven by the Place 3D. Now, the Place 3D is what we're going to be moving around. Now, to find out where that is, where does Maya put everything by default when you create something new?
In the center of the scene.
Center of the scene, the origin, the 0, 0 point on your grid. That's exactly where it dropped this in. Now, to find it, I can go to wireframe.
Or you can go to your list.
Yeah, I can go to my outliner too, right?
Yeah.
And there it is, and I can select it that way. Now, here's the cool thing, which this should work. And I say should because it's Maya. And it works every once in a while. With my Place 3D selected, I can go into the attributes of my Place 3D. You can see I've got 3D transform, 3D rotate, 3D scale. There's also a button down here that says fit to group B box. That stands for bounding box. Did they teach you guys what bounding boxes are in modeling? You guys know what bounding boxes are. If you don't, who's in game art? You should know what bounding boxes are, because bounding boxes are also the basis of how collisions are calculated. So for every object we have in our scene, for example, let me select pillows over here. Let me go over and zoom in on the pillow. All right, so my pillow is basically what primitive shape? Probably a square, cube, something like that. This shape can be defined by 8 points, 8 bounding points around it. So that means I could have 1, 2 for the back, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those 8 shapes would basically make up the container that that pillow would fit into. Think of it like a shipping box, right? They stuff pillows into shipping boxes. They ship them out. All right. That bounding box is a simple way for a system to figure out where that object lies. And if that object's bounding box hits another bounding box, that's where you can calculate a collision. So for example, in games, when you've got walls set up, you generally can't walk through walls, right? Unless it's poorly designed. So what happens is they've got the bounding box of the character, the bounding box of the wall, and when they come close enough, it does not allow bounding boxes to interpenetrate. Now, in cases of a collision where you've got damage, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes on. We won't even go into that. But bounding boxes are a way for us to calculate a very quick shape that an object takes up in 3D space. Right? Those 8 coordinates are a lot simpler to define than each one of these verts. Right? So, our projection uses the same kind of idea. Now, the reason I went into this whole rant about this is because our place 3D here at the center of the world, you go down and grab it. Right here, we go to wireframe. I can click this button that says fit to group B box, and what it will do is it will take that placement and projection and fit it to the bounding box of my thermos. So when I click that button, it doesn't work because it's Maya. I swear this works whenever I don't do a demo. All right, here's what should happen. All right, this should move right over to where the thermos is, and it should take up the shape of the thermos. This will probably happen to you. So what you have to do is just physically move it over, translate it over, position it, and then you'll be able to project it. And I'll show you. All right, so by default, what it did was scale it and just look at me stupid. So I'm going to put my scale back to 1 by 1 by 1, which is much smaller, much simpler to manage. Just hit the W tool to translate and just roughly position it to where the thermos is. All right, now, let me zoom in and do a quick test render. Right now, that is pointed right at my thermos, so it should project the logo just like a projector projects a scene or, a movie, a still image. It should project it right onto the thermos. So let me pull up the It tool. And let's do just a quick perspective here. All right, so I can see it's there. It's huge. It doesn't look anything like my reference. If you're wondering what my reference should look like, that is basically come back. We provided you with thermos reference back for project 6. So that is the scale and placement of how the logo should look. So what I need to do is get mine to conform to that. Now right now, first off, it's way too big. What also is it doing here? Duplicating or repeating. Let's deal with one thing first. What shape is my thermos bottle? Cylindrical. The nice thing about projections is, just like UVs, remember UVs, you've got planar projections, you've also got cylindrical, you've got spherical. The projection for textures works the same way too. By default, you get a planar projection, flat. Great for walls, great for flat surfaces. Curved surfaces like this, you definitely don't want a planar because it's going to distort the logo. So what I can do is go back into my projection node, which quick way I can do that is just go back into the hypershade, select my projection. In the projection attributes, go down to cylindrical. Change it from planar to cylindrical. All right, so there it is. That's good. Now I can rotate this around, and I can start to scale it and position it. Reason I'm rotating it around is because I wanted to be able to see that logo from my camera, right about there. So let me do another quick render from perspective. All right, now, as far as positioning this, I know it's too big, it's also repeating. Let's take care of the repeat part first. If I want to stop something from repeating, just like with the wine label, what did I do? Okay, go to the hypershade. There's my AAA logo. Yeah, I want place 2D. Yeah, I want to turn off wrap U and wrap V. That will stop it from wrapping itself around, filling the entire surface. I just want the area that my projection takes up. All right, so for this, I'm going to run IPR so I can start adjusting things on the fly. All right, there we go. First problem that I have, besides the logo scale, I'm going to do that last, because that's the easiest thing to fix. I've got kind of a whitish box around it, and the rest of this is dark. So we have to figure out, first off, what is causing that. Because this is actually the base color that I need. But this somehow is being magically altered. Well, the white background is causing this, which, if you remember, my edge color was white, so that worked fine. But wherever my logo is not, I don't have a white background. All right, here's what's going on. Whenever you place a texture on a surface, if you tell that texture to stop repeating, it's not going to wrap itself. By default, the material really has no other color around it, normally, because the texture is taking up the material color, right, in the attribute you put it into. So what we have to fix is the material comes with something called a default color. That's meant to replace areas that are not covered by a texture. So there are no holes in your material. It simply means that you've got a material, wherever you don't have a logo, you need to have some coverage for that. Anybody here during modeling ever have your model mesh turned or the shaded mode turned green on you? Okay, if it turns green, that means it lost its material property. We don't want that to happen, so Maya, by default, puts into every file node something called a default color. And it gives it 50% gray, just like everything else. So what's happening here is this background on our logo is being covered by that default 50% gray color. We want to change that default color to be what? White, because we want it to match the background of our logo. Now, to do that, we can go into the hypershade and we select the file node. So back to hypershade, file node, that's going to be my AAA logo. Under File, there's Color Balance, Expand Color Balance. There is default color. We want to make that white. So now when I make it white, the whole thermos now is back to the color that it was. Does that make sense? Now the last piece of the puzzle is scaling the logo proportionately, getting it to look good. For that, you're definitely going to need IPR because, like I said, you can't see it in the viewport, which is kind of annoying. That's why real time is awesome. But we deal with it. Now, in order to scale that, let me close the hypershade. I'm going to select my Place 3D. I can use my normal rotate scale tools, or in my Place 3D, I can click Interactive Placement. And that gives me the ability to scale, rotate all in one shot. So for example, let's scale that in, scale this up. Now, notice IPR is not catching up with me. That's when you kill it and you start it again. It does not really like when you scale stuff. There we go. So now that is just kind of weird looking. You can always go back to just the normal scale tool. All right, so what I'm trying to do is roughly match the position, the scale of my reference. So this technique can be used for a bunch of stuff. For example, I think I gave the example of, projecting some of these, images that we've got tacked up on the wall. You could also use it for a label like this. This is just glued right onto the door. That would be perfect. So for the AAA logo, or the thermos logo, that needs to go into which part of your material? Edge color. You're going to put it in as a projection. You're going to have it repeat. How do you turn off the repeating part? So Place 2D, texture. You want to turn off wrap new and wrap 2. Good. Next, you want to make sure that you get your projection. It's sitting aimed at your geometry in the right place. Get it roughly lined up. Get your background color fixed. And you should be set.
Some
Okay. So blue aluminum, what we wind up doing is
Changing like the color of the logo.
we could change the color of the logo, but it's the background that we're interested in. So what we can do is we can change the background color of our logo. We could do whatever color that is. Projections and layering don't work good together. For some reason, they're not that crazy about it. But actually, no, you can do it as a projection. So we've used what we're going to talk about next, which is layering in mind, which allows us to keep a different color. Even with that white logo background, we can use what's called a blend mode to remove that white. All right, so let me stop IPR here. And let's talk about layering in Maya. Then we'll take a break and we'll come back and we'll play with it together a little bit. All right, so if you haven't done so, download that SAL layered texture reference. It's pretty simple. It's got 2 pages. The first one is basically how layering with Maya works versus Photoshop. And the second one is some of the basic Maya blend modes. And we'll talk about blend modes because blend modes are really important. All right. So, Photoshop, even Substance Designer, and Substance Painter. We worked with Painter the other day. All right, Painter, Photoshop have vertical layering systems. The bottom layer is where?
Bottom.
Bottom, yep, it was a trick question. Each new layer subsequently sits on top. To turn visibility off and on, you've got an eye icon that will let you see that layer. Anything you want to work on needs to be selected. You've got opacity for that layer, fill control, and a blend mode. Maya is like Photoshop, but it fell down, sideways. So, this way. So the top is on the far left, and the bottom is on the far right. Anything in between is one of your middle layers. This is also in the PDF. That mode. All right, now, in Photoshop, if you want to make a new layer, what do you do? Got a little icon here. I think you can do Command N. We'll create a new layer in there. You can right-click, create a new layer. In Maya, to create a new layer, you simply click anywhere in this blank area. Each brand new layer gets this disgusting lime green jello fill.
But that's not default green.
That's the default green. That's to let you know, hey, I'm empty. If you don't do anything, this is what you're going to get. Whereas in Photoshop, you'll either get black, you'll get white, or you'll get no background, depending on what your preferences are. Now, to remove a layer in Photoshop, what do you do?
Hit delete.
Yeah, you select it, hit delete. In Maya, you must click this little X button underneath your layer. What happens if you miss?
You make a new layer.
You make a new layer, and you can really PO yourself quickly. Because Maya is, you think it's spiteful, and it is. So you can easily create like 30 layers in a fit of button clicking. Trouble is, you're going to have to remove them all. There is no way to multiple select them and remove them all at once. To move a layer around in Photoshop, what do you do? Left click and drag. In Maya, you must middle click and drag. That means if you want to swap positions, you must click on your layer, middle mouse button, hold it, drag it left or drag it right. Middle mouse. Vlad, wake up. Vlad, wake up. Oh, it's not Vlad, it's Mustafa, sorry. You're sitting where Vlad is. Alright, so we've got creating a new layer, simple, click in the blank area, delete a layer, click underneath, move a layer around, middle mouse. To plug something into a layer, which you actually can do in Photoshop, you can plug in masks, you can plug in layer effects, they sit on top. These actually get attached to the layer. You come down the color, and you can click the mapping button. This one happens to have something plugged into it. That's why it's blue. You can give this color swatch any color you want. It could be a solid color. You can plug a file into it. You can plug a projection into it. Alpha, that works just like Photoshop's opacity. Visibility, we turn our layers by selecting them off and on with the layer is visible button. And then blend modes work just like Photoshop's blend modes, except Photoshop's got 3 times as many blend modes. But there are basic pool of blend modes we use all the time. All right. First off, to talk about blend modes, we need to define a couple things. One, what is the value of black? And the other, what is the value of white? Black is equal to what number in Maya, in Photoshop? It is 0. White is 1. Good. So with those 2 things in mind, we can use 2 of the most common blend modes that we have. One is add. The other is multiply. Remember, when we work with lighting, it's an additive process. Color is additive, intensity is additive. All right, so to figure out how these work, I'm going to add 0 and 1 to add and multiply. So we're going to figure out what happened. One of the most common backgrounds that you're going to find in the internet when you search for logos, when you search for images, is going to be white. That is the most common background color. What we can do with blend modes is we can do what's called, well, I'm not going to tell you what it is because it'll give away the operation, but we can remove that white background when we go to render or we go to put it into a compositing package. And knowing addition, multiply, and over is the basis for compositing. Whether it's in-game or whether it's for film, TV, movies, doesn't matter. All right, so to figure out how this works, I need a number. That number will represent a color, or it could be a value. 2. All right, so 2 will be our color. So we've got a logo whose color is 2, and we've got a background on it. First, our 2 has a background of black. Black is what value? 0. So what we want to do is we want to plug 2 in here and find out which one of these processes is going to remove the black and leave 2 alone. So 0 has a black background. If I take black, add it to 2, what do I get? 2. How about if I have a white background? 3. Which one gives me the unaltered effect? Which one?
Are you trying to get rid of the black? Or
Trying to get rid of the black and just leave 2.
do 3?
Why 3?
Because if you do simple amount, 0. Because if you add 1 to 0, I can't explain it right now. It's too early.
All right, so 2 has a black background. We want to remove the black background and leave just 2. Which one of these simple equations does that?
The first one.
The first one, right? 0 plus 2 equals 2. If we have a white background, we add it to our color, it's going to make that background lighter because you're adding white into the color. Does that make sense? Yes? No? Okay, good. Now, let's go down under multiply. We've got a white background. 2 now has a white background. So our job is to figure out which one is going to leave 2, which one is going to work. So 0 times 2 is what? 0. 1 times 2? 2. So if we have a white background, we want to remove it, we use multiply. That's really as simple as it is. As long as you can figure out which one gives you the unaltered result. And remember, 2, that's our placeholder. That could be anything. That could be a logo itself. It could be, could be a color. That's the basis for this to work. Now, the downside is, if your logo's got white in it or it's got black in it, when you use these blend modes, it's going to remove that also in your logo. So we have to create a mask for it, which is an alpha channel, so that it keeps it. But this is the basis for blending things together. Questions?
When I've tried it before, when you go to Photoshop and you want to destroy or get rid of the background, you get that checker layer.
Right.
So there's nothing
That's
there.
clear.
It doesn't work for mine, right?
What do you mean, what doesn't work for mine?
Well, when I try to bring in that texture or anything like that, it multiplies that layer over and over and over again, so it covers it.
Well, you cannot bring a transparent image, no.
Okay.
That's why you have blend mode.
Okay.
You have to remove it that way.
I didn't know if there's a way to turn it.
Yeah, that's called a pre-multiplied file.
Okay.
So when you go to do compositing, a lot of times they'll have alphas in them, and you just throw them in there, and if it recognizes it as pre-multiplied, it'll get rid of the background, just keep your stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
That's kind of what you're going after.
Yeah.
But everything has to have some kind of mask, some kind of alpha
Okay.
in it. It's just the simple file formats like PNG for the web, that transparency works.
Okay.
Because they build their whole image system based on trying to be as efficient and simple as possible.
Right.
Alright, so the only other blend mode we use quite a bit is called over. So, over is applied a lot like a decal. And the thing about over is that's what you need if your logo has, say, white as a background and you multiplied out everything. So creating an alpha channel for it will solve that problem. So it uses the alpha to remove everything, just like we did with the wine label. Only it will remove it as part of your image or part of your projection, whatever it happens to be. All right, so a couple quick things before we go on break. Okay, what blend mode is going to get rid of the background here for the AAA logo? Multiply, right. How about if my image is reversed? Add, very good. So, if you've got a dark background, you've got white paint, this is perfect. So get rid of the black, keep the white, and that'll stand over top of your image.
What if, the logo you have is that white, and then it has like the second color on that white?
Right, so for example, let me go back
Has, like,
here.
an outline or something like
Yeah. I got what you're saying. So the example we're going to do when we come back is we're going to take the AAA logo. The customer says, great, you get rid of the white background, but my logo's got a white background.
Right.
So I need that to be kept. And that's when we're going to use an alpha channel. That's when we're going to use the overblend mode. That will work. All right, questions before we go on break? All right, so let's come back at 8:45.